From the heart of the city too busy to hate, a progressive voice making too much sense for corporate media's comfort. This is The Ron Show, where we the people come first. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Hello, and thank you for listening. Weekdays, 8 a.m., 4 p.m. on Georgia Now, 11 p.m. Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. Who saw that coming, right? I mean, we were all on watch to find out if and when, or how do I say this without sounding indelicate, if Mitch McConnell was still alive. I mean, we got proof of life over the weekend that Mitch McConnell has outlasted Lindsey Graham, who we didn't have on our watch list necessarily. Interestingly enough, it was Lindsey Graham who passed away over the weekend at the age of 71 after returning from a trip to Ukraine, where he was doing one of those things that conflicts you, I guess, in some respects, in how you feel about Lindsey in the aftermath. Senator Lindsey Graham, by the way, I lived in South Carolina for 11 years, so I'm somewhat dialed into the complexities of Lindsey Graham representing the state of South Carolina, a very conservative Republican population in that state. And yet Lindsey Graham had, the secret that really wasn't all that big a secret. And I'm not going to try and be inhospitable to paying respects by having this discussion, I guess. But I will talk to you from the position of a Southern-born, white, gay man himself, that's me, about Lindsey and why there are so many complex feelings about his passing. He was coming back from Ukraine, actually feeling very optimistic that he had a breakthrough in some respects in aiding Ukraine's ability to end the war with Russia, a war that Ukraine did not ask for, a war that throughout all of the MAGA hostility to the U.S. funding aid to Ukraine during the Biden presidency, a lot of that money, a lot of that's tamped down, by the way. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene's still off in the weeds, upset that it's not America first with every dime spent. But Lindsey Graham was one of those few Republican throwback establishment sane voices from the Cold War era, Reagan era mindset of the GOP that was, of that mindset that a hostile Soviet Union or a hostile Russia, a hostile Putin has to be stopped. It was in the aftermath of that return from Ukraine that Lindsey Graham passed away with essentially cardiac disease. A late Saturday night, early Sunday morning 911 call from his home in Washington, D.C., revealing that Lindsey had a heart attack and essentially passed away. First, let's start with reaction from leaders here in the state of Georgia on the passing of Lindsey Graham. This from WXIE-TV 11 Live.
Georgia leaders and lawmakers are also paying tribute tonight to Senator Graham. Governor Brian Kemp posted it on X saying, in part, Senator Lindsey Graham was a patriot, an impactful public servant, and a friend. His love of his nation, this nation, unyielding belief in its possibilities and defense of its values made him a true force to be reckoned with in Washington. Senator and Reverend Raphael Warnock also posting on X saying, in part, I am deeply saddened by the passing of my colleague, Senator Lindsey Graham. He was a man of great faith who served the people of South Carolina with passion and tenacity. I am praying for his family and his loved ones as they mourn this tremendous loss.
Senator John Ossoff adding in a statement, I join in mourning Senator Lindsey Graham and extend my deepest condolences to the senator's families, friends, and staff. He said Senator Graham dedicated his life to the United States, from his service in the U.S. Air Force to his representation of the state of South Carolina in the U.S. House and Senate. Lindsey was an energetic leader who loved South Carolina. May Lindsey's memory be a blessing. And here's where, for me, I'm going to take you down the path of conflict. I'm very much conflicted about Lindsey Graham and whatever his legacy will be. I happen to think that, much like the rest of the Republican Party, Lindsey Graham's legacy is going to be tarnished by the last decade. The last decade, of course, being the Trump decade, bookending a Joe Biden presidency with one we know disastrous term, the second faring as poorly and hopefully not trending to be worse than the first. We can always hope. However, with Trump's approvals in the mid to low 30s, the American public seems to have weighed in on that. How much of that will dog Lindsey Graham's legacy? I guess that's for historians to note. Lindsey Graham, of course, was, as you heard in clips over the weekend, one of those tenacious legislators who actually had, I think, a fairly decent bipartisan record, sought to find meaningful ways to accomplish goals for the American people and his constituency. And then you get to the last decade and the last 10 years, and you find yourself wondering, what happened to that Lindsey Graham? Where did that Lindsey Graham go? And again, for me personally, as a Southern-born out gay white male, I'm even more conflicted. Obviously, from an ideological standpoint, I had very, very, very little I ever would have agreed with Lindsey Graham on. Very little, politically. But there's also, to me, the damage done by someone who had an opportunity to stand out, to step out, to advocate. This is where I'll give Tim Scott, the other senator from the state of South Carolina, his due. Tim Scott, as a black man, when the opportunity arose and the conversation called for it, would clap back at overtly racist statements or actions by those within the conservative movement or his party or leading his party or in the White House even. Tim Scott would stiffen his spine and stand up and say something if something needed to be said from the perspective of a black man in response to something tinged with racism or overtly racist. Lindsey Graham never did that for the LGBTQI+. And I know what you're thinking. Some might say that's not his responsibility. He's not an out gay man. You're right. Was not an out gay man. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I know for a fact, because I don't, but it's pretty well chronicled. And honestly, while I know non-disclosure agreements don't expire, the stories are already out. They were out before he died. They're coming out more now. It's just that someone at this point in his life who has nothing to lose, I mean, I guess a re-election, and polls, by the way, showed that Dr. Annie Andrews was actually within the margin of error in the recent polling data that was coming out. I guess it's possible that at age 71, running for re-election, and why anyone in their 70s or 80s is running for office again, to me, that's something that we really need to address, right? But outside of that, he had nothing to lose. Wealthy beyond his means. Had, his home in D.C., homes, I believe, multiple homes in South Carolina. He'd done well for himself over time. He had nothing to lose. At some point in time, he could have shared his truth and been the sort of maverick within his party that his dear close friend, also in the U.S. Senate, who passed away in the last decade, Senator John McCain, proved himself to be as well. I mean, he revered Senator McCain on so many levels, and yet he never measured up to Senator McCain or even Tim Scott when it came time to stiffen his spine and at least show a little bit of his truth and standing up for it. I mean, what are principles if you can't employ principles for yourself? It was over the weekend that actor Randolph Mantooth from the old NBC show Emergency passed away. I know you're wrong. Where are you going with this? I knew at like 5-6 years old, watching Emergency and seeing Randolph Mantooth on that TV show. Later on, John Schneider on the Dukes of Hazzard. I knew I liked guys. I knew there was something about guys that, drew my attention in. Handsome dudes. Ponch and John from Chips. I could sit here and name the TV shows left and right. And I was like 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. I say all that to say that I understand what it's like growing up in the closet in the South, living in the closet in the South. It wasn't until I got my last radio job in 2018 that I was hired in radio broadcasting by people who knew I was gay. That's right, 2018. I was 44 years old. My last radio job, the very first one and all the ones that would follow. No way I was telling HR. No way I was telling the person interviewing me. No way I was telling the boss that was going to hire me that I was gay. So I get it. I get the complexities. I get the perils of being out in the South and working in a prominent position. The thing is, like radio, eventually people come to know your story, right? And it's radio. It's broadcasting. You know, the place is filled with gay people or bi people or people who are just accepting of gay and bi people or lesbians and trans. You know, it's just full of that sort of diversity. And it's as if Lindsey Graham existed so long in Congress as a Republican, all the whispers, I mean, everyone knew. Everyone within his ranks knew. His party, they knew. Those in South Carolina, they knew. They didn't care as long as he was getting the job done for the party or for the constituents that were voting for him or in Congress with the caucus, you know. And they were okay with that as long as he was going to continue not to speak up or speak ill or speak up for the LGBTQI plus or speak ill of bigotry within his party. And I guess he carried on with that. It just makes you wonder, how can you pay respects to someone who did not have respect for himself in that way? It's very complicated, right? As is or was being an anti-Trumper during the Trump decade. We'll pick up on that conversation when the Ron Show returns. It's George Now, Progressive Voice of You. Tune in wherever you podcast. There are a lot of reasons for folks to feel conflicted about Lindsey Graham, who became one of Donald Trump's greatest allies in the U.S. Senate, but also the same Lindsey Graham who in 2016 was saying stuff like this.
The Trump supporters for a minute. I don't know who you are, and I don't know why you like this guy. He's a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot. He doesn't represent my party. He doesn't represent the values that the men and women who wear the uniform are fighting for. I think he's a kook. I think he's crazy. I think he's unfit for office. And I'm a Republican, and he's not. He's not a conservative Republican. He's an opportunist. He's not fit to be president of the United States. He's disparaged women. He has an 80% disapproval rating among Hispanics. At the end of the day, he would be the most flawed nominee in the history of the Republican Party. He accuses most illegal immigrants of being rapists and drug dealers. He plays into the idea that maybe Obama is a Muslim. 70% of us in South Carolina believe that Donald Trump is not a conservative Republican. We think that he's unfit for office, that he would be a terrible commander-in-chief. He doesn't have the temperament or judgment. I think Donald Trump is a political car wreck, and people slow down and look at the wreck, but they eventually move on.
Well, the Republican Party obviously did not move on, and Lindsey Graham didn't either. And that's why when you listen back to clips like that, and then you watch for the last 10 years as he has shilled for Donald Trump, you go, where were the principles? You're going to hear a lot of eulogizing from folks who talk about how he was a principled conservative. But are we not supposed to believe what our eyes and ears told us the last 10 years? Hell, let's just listen to Lindsey Graham for the last 4 months.
America First is to kill people who wish us ill.
I feel good about the Republican Party. We're killing all the right people and we're cutting your taxes. We've run out of bombs. We didn't run out of bombs in World War II. You just wait to see what comes in the next 2 weeks. We're going to blow the hell out of these people. We're in a religious war here. I am with Israel. Do whatever the hell you have to do to defend yourself. Level the place.
Why is it okay for America to drop two nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end their existential threat war? Why was it okay for us to do that? I thought it was okay. To Israel, do whatever you have to do to survive as a Jewish state.
Iran's going to have a choice in 2 to 3 weeks. You either do a deal where you get out of the business you were in, or we're going to blow your stuff up. Our friends in Israel are surrounded by people that want to kill them, destroy them, a second Holocaust in the making. What is the proportional response to people who want to kill you and your family?
God.
They're running out of ammunition in Israel. We have to help our friends. I go back to South Carolina. I'm asking them to send their sons and daughters over to the Mideast. To our friends in Israel, God bless you. I'm with you in every way. To all the anti-Semitites, to all the isolationists, forget it. I'm not with you. I'm with Israel. I will be with Israel to our dying day. There's no better partner on the planet than Israel. God bless Israel.
Right.
We should move all our stuff to Israel. Thank you.
Right. He's a big Netanyahu fan. I say Israel because he said Israel. He never said Netanyahu. But Israel isn't exactly in lockstep with Netanyahu the way Lindsey Graham is in lockstep with Netanyahu. American Jewish voters aren't in lockstep with Netanyahu and Israel under Netanyahu the way Lindsey Graham was in lockstep with Netanyahu and Israel. But did that Lindsey Graham to you sound as unhinged as the Donald Trump he promised would be such a disaster to this country and his party if Donald Trump were to be the nominee? It sounds to me like Lindsey Graham just morphed into the sort of politician that he warned us Donald Trump was going to be. In short, the uniqueness that Lindsey Graham could have presented the American body politic, he instead became something like Play-Doh. Whatever you lean the Play-Doh up against is what the Play-Doh would show you it was. Lindsey Graham around Senator John McCain, a bit more of a maverick. Lindsey Graham, in the shadow of Donald Trump, became a complete acolyte.
80% of the people today in a Washington Post poll think you're too old to be president of the United States. I'm worried about you being commander-in-chief for 4 more months, much less 4 more years. Why don't you take a cognitive exam to assure all of us that you're as fit as you say you are, because all of us doubt it.
Yeah.
Why won't he take a cognitive test, Sean? Because he would fail it. He knows he would fail. Mm-hmm. Everybody who wants Biden to stay in place knows he will fail. And it scares the hell out of me that we're going to be having this man to be commander-in-chief for 4 more months.
Oh, that was from when Biden was president. I'm sorry, up until he said Biden, I was thinking, yeah, this guy's spitting some facts. Meanwhile, Joe Biden's still alive. I'm telling you, the thoughts on Lindsey post-mortem are just complex, and for a reason. Lindsey Graham actually liked Joe Biden, though, before Joe Biden was president. See, again, this brings up some complexities to how you feel about Lindsey Graham.
Joe Biden as a person, that's probably, you got a problem. You need to do some self-evaluation, because what's not to like? Here's what I can tell you, that life can change just like that. Don't take it for granted. Don't take relationships for granted. I called him after Bo died, and he basically said, well, Bo was my soul. We've talked for a long time. He came to my ceremony and said some of the most incredibly heartfelt things that anybody could ever say to me. And he's the nicest person I think I've ever met in politics.
Is that right?
He is as good a man as God ever created, and we don't agree on much, but I think he's been dealt a really gut blow. I think he focuses on what he's got to do, not what he lost. His heart's been ripped out, but he's going to make sure that the other members of his family is well taken care of, and he started talking about his grandkids. More worried about them than anything.
That's Lindsey Graham on January 6, 2021, talking about the soon-to-be president, Joe Biden. And not long after that, Lindsey Graham just disappeared. Well, off to Mar-a-Lago to reapply the spit on the boots. It's actually Hunter Biden who I think sort of sums up what I'm thinking here myself when he tweets, when I heard about Senator Graham's death last night, the first thing I thought about was not all the things he said and did in service of Donald Trump. I thought of the time before Donald Trump when he was a brother to Senator John McCain. A time when senators from different parties could fight about politics and still be friends. A time when a conservative Republican from South Carolina could say of my father, if you can't admire Joe Biden as a person, you've got a problem. He's the nicest person I've ever met in politics. As good a man as God ever created. Hunter continued, that is the Senator Graham I will remember today, not because I have forgotten what came after, because in that memory there is hope. Hope for a country where brothers can fight like hell over policy and still share a meal and a laugh. and the loss of the people they love. Hunter Biden saying, I will choose to remember the time before Trump because I believe in an America after Trump. It was in a Politico piece earlier this year that Lindsey Graham said, if you told me in 2016 that I would wind up being one of the better friends, closest advisors, and admire him as commander-in-chief, I wouldn't have believed you, Graham said of Donald Trump. Right, exactly. And that's what complicates the legacy of Lindsey Graham, who, again, was, by liberal and progressive standards, someone who is, again, a Southern white gay man. I thought he failed people on many measures even before Donald Trump. But I can at least look back to the kind of Republican he was pre-Trump and think, okay, while we wait for him to have that personal awakening and to act on that in a principled manner, when it came to Donald Trump, at least he could call a spade a spade. He could see it for what it was and say, that ain't the right way to go. And he gave us brief glimpses of that, but always cowered in the face of power.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is The Ron Show.
Heard weekdays 8 a.m., 4 p.m. on Georgia Now, 11 p.m. Progressive Voice of you. Tune in and review podcast. So we're faced with another shocking death. So not a murder like the Charlie Kirk assassination was. And that, by the way, starting to play itself out in court, interestingly enough. But the passing of Lindsey Graham puts another opportunity on the social media, Barbie, if you don't mind. I'm throwing that on the grill. For the American people to show how their partisanship reflects their response to a death. And what do you say? I'm not going to sit here and defend folks who spent all day yesterday. I got plenty of them sent my way in DMs and texts left and right, all the Lindsey Graham jokes. I chose not to partake in that simply because, again, I sort of have, and a lot of us do, those of us who were born in the South, who were raised gay or, raised in the closet and came out, like, I understand the stresses. I understand when you feel like there's so much at stake that you can't be your true nature. And again, I'm not outing Lindsey Graham. I don't know anything for a fact. Certainly don't firsthand. I never met the man. Can vouch for that. But it's like the biggest not secret in Washington, the biggest not secret in South Carolina politics. Lindsey Graham enjoyed the company of younger men, allegedly a lot, and was just the celebrated, eligible, air quotes, bachelor for as long as he was. Guess he just never met the right woman. Ever. But it was his history as a Republican congressman and then senator, his LGBTQI plus record, nearly spotless if you're a Republican bigot. I just, how do you have respect for that? How do you have respect for someone who doesn't stand up for, again, allegedly, his true nature? It's very hard to eulogize and ask anyone to eulogize him in a respectful manner. I think the only thing I did over the weekend, I posted on, in fact, I did, it was late Saturday night or early Sunday morning when I awoke to the news. And I just shared on my personal Facebook account, Lindsey Graham is dead. That's all I said. There were folks who were upset with me. That's what why can't you pay respects? In what way would I pay respects? In what way would I, knowing who I am, and he knowing who he is, sort of, allegedly, how would I pay respects? I think I did the right thing by just notating the moment for history's sake, for posterity. Someone I know on social media, big Trump fanatic. Whether you're left or right, if your first reaction is to celebrate someone's death because you had a different opinion from them, you need serious help. Vile, disgusting behavior. It was less than 4 months ago, y'all, that Donald Trump had posted on Truth Social his celebrating celebrating the death of Robert Mueller. He literally tweeted with a photo of Mueller. Robert Mueller just died. Good. I'm glad he's dead. He can no longer hurt innocent people. President Donald J. Trump. Yeah, for me, I don't want to hear, listen, before MAGA's pearl clutch about anyone's reaction to a death, in the last 36 hours, they need to remember when that's someone who they herald and cling to. 35% approval to me is still like god-awful high given the track record. Anyway, when that man tweeted, good, I'm glad he's dead. He can no longer hurt innocent people. Less than 4 months ago. And they want to get all pious now, be all high and mighty about how people react to a death. If those same folks weren't racing to their social media platforms to judge that response, and those who echoed it and retweeted it and shared it and applauded it, well, listen, you can kindly shut the there's just no, I have no room for saying, you know what, I'm with you there. 1,000% with you. It's deplorable behavior, blah, 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 blah. I had someone, when I actually shared that sentiment on social media, someone who I think is one of those principled, mostly liberal, I'd say moderate liberal type, voices who would call me out or rein me in if he felt like I had overstepped or something. He says, man, I can't even argue with that. And that goes back to why the legacy of Lindsey Graham will always, in my mind, be somewhat complicated, because that's sort of epitomizes how those principled conservatives in our orbit, the lifelong Republicans that we maybe were neighbors of or shared family space with, even friends with, that's kind of how they've been too. And while we'll never know what a post-Donald Trump Lindsey Graham would have been like, he was running for a 6-year Senate term that would have, we assume, we hope, would have outlasted the 2 years remaining in Donald Trump's presidency, because Trump can't run for a third term. We would have gotten to see, I assume, although, again, polling showed that Dr. Annie Andrews was actually within striking distance in South Carolina. We assume that we'd have gotten to have seen, I guess, what a Senator Lindsey Graham would have been like in the aftermath of Donald Trump. And listen, there are no shortage of Republicans like Lindsey Graham who didn't like the golden escalator descending Donald Trump, who then bent the knee once Donald Trump became the nominee and then president, and then blinked on January 6th and rethought and recalibrated, and then bent the knee again. There are no shortage of Republicans just like Lindsey Graham. The vice president comes to mind. He of the America's Hitler quote. Marco Rubio. No shortage of Marco Rubio clips speaking ill of Donald Trump before glomming on about Donald Trump. They too will be figures in the Republican Party who will undoubtedly vie for the nomination to be president in 2028. It'll be interesting to watch as those two, while we assume still members of the Trump cabinet, less so Marco Rubio, he could always step aside and distance himself. And you know what? Now that you mention it, at some point in time, if he's going to do that, that's going to happen soon, right? It's such a critical juncture, too. He better start cleaning some stuff up, maybe after the midterms. But he's got the Iran situation to sort of figure out. He's got the Israel-Gaza situation, which we, I guess, assume is, I don't know, Netanyahu's going to Netanyahu, and still does. Ask the folks on the West Bank. The Ukraine-Russia situation, still to work out. Venezuela, Cuba. Marco Rubio's going to have to at some point in time, I think, say, I need to distance myself from this. And does that give Marco Rubio a little bit of a head start and advantage on that distancing from Donald Trump game that Vice President J.D. Vance simply can't? I mean, he can't just step down from the vice presidency, can he? But we're all surrounded by conservative, principled, rock-ribbed conservatives who likely believe that Donald Trump wasn't a conservative, wasn't a real conservative. You know, he was a Democrat before he was never a Democrat. He always supported Democratic candidates because he was in New York City, and that's all there was. He'd always support any politician who would help him get what he wanted. And there were no shortage of even liberal politicians in New York City and New York State who would do that. He gave money to Hillary Clinton when she was senator. No, Donald Trump was never like a principled liberal. He was always not an America first conservative. He was a me first Trumper. He was the first me first Trumper. And now the entire party is a Trump first Trumper, letting the grift and the fraud just run unabated. It'll just be interesting, I think, to watch. We won't get to see this out of Lindsey Graham, but it'll be interesting to watch anyway, as the rest of the Republican Party starts to pivot from the era of Trumpism. And if it doesn't happen on January 20, 2029, in some respects, you have to think for Marco Rubio, it'll happen at some point in time. I would say a year from now, when he needs to step down to distance himself to run for president. Plausible deniability, right? I've had time to reflect, blah, blah, all that rhetoric. But J.D. Vance cannot. Lindsey Graham obviously will not. And for the rest of the Republican Party, the question is, well, when will that happen for them? Will it be in the aftermath of whatever we perceive to be a blue wave coming in November of this year? I don't know. All ponderous stuff. But to me, this sort of, again, reflects on the legacy of Lindsey Graham and how I think that will forever be tarnished, as will the legacy of anyone that we value in our orbit, in our sphere, those that we know for their principled conservatism. Well, how principled were you? How morally superior do you feel you have been? I think about my ex-in-laws, the Pentecostal minister and his dutiful Christian wife, who never spoke ill, who championed in some respects Donald Trump in this MAGA era. It makes you wonder, how will you feel about them in the days, weeks, months, years in the aftermath of Donald Trump? Will you ever forget? I mean, it's hard to forget a decade. Will you ever forget the person they were in this chapter of American history, in this chapter of their life and your life? Will you ever forget that? It's going to be really hard to. And that's why Lindsey Graham's legacy, for me, is complicated. So what'll happen now in South Carolina, Governor McMaster will appoint someone to fulfill the expiring term of Senator Lindsey Graham. And remember, he was running for office. He was running for re-election. So that term does end in January of 2027. You can expect Henry McMaster to bend the knee and appoint someone of Donald Trump's choosing. My God, are we going to get a Senator Nancy Mace? No, unlikely, I guess, because she's in Congress too, and then you'd have to have another special election for that. And so, I'm not one to horse pick who that principled MAGA Trump person's going to be, but will it be someone who jumps into the hastily called August primary to renominate someone for the Senate race against Dr. Annie Andrews, who, again, was polling quite well in recent weeks against Lindsey Graham? Lindsey Graham was not a popular person in the state of South Carolina. And in the last decade had become less popular because, again, I think that there are still that strain of Republican, that principled Republican who looked at a Lindsey Graham just the way we have here in the last 30 minutes on this show and thought, how do I respect that? Where is this man's principles? Interestingly enough, speaking of Dr. Annie Andrews, Jennifer Bowery's Bonnie at Mediaite had filed this story in the immediate aftermath of Lindsey Graham's passing. A shocking poll by a progressive research firm showed that Lindsey Graham was in a tight battle with his Democratic challenger in South Carolina, y'all, in the upcoming midterm election shortly before he died Saturday at the age of 71. Impact Research put out a poll on June 30th that Graham held a narrow 3-point lead on Dr. Annie Andrews, which was within the survey's expected margin of error. It's a remarkably close number for a state that backed Donald Trump by 18 points in 2024. Graham only narrowly led in a head-to-head ballot, the report said. Senator Graham starts out below 50% with a +3 lead overall. 45% for Annie Andrews, Dr. Andrews, 48% for Graham, 7% undecided. And Graham trails, 7% undecided is a lot for a state that's had Lindsey Graham representing it for decades now. Anyway, and Graham trails by 22 points among independents. This continues. There are a whole lot of independents in South Carolina. I would think most independents, I don't know, maybe there is that never Trumper independent, Republican. I don't know. That's an independent. This continues the tight trajectory we found in March polling, they write, when the race was then at a 5-point margin. Annie Andrews is nudging the needle in her direction, even despite Graham's early spend to try and save the seat. Mediaite continuing, the poll prompted the progressive firm to encourage, quote, national investment in Andrews, writing, any race with an incumbent polling this low and tight is an opportunity for Democrats, and now Graham is on the ballot in a potential wave year without Trump on the ballot to boost GOP turnout. With the proper resources to both defend her values and highlight Lindsey's weaknesses, they write, we believe Dr. Annie Andrews will put this seat in play and it is worth national investment. Though the survey was conducted by a partisan outfit, many experts generally consider Impact Research credible. Nate Silver called them a BC pollster with a pro-Democrat bias of only 1.32 points on average. Even accounting for the partisan lean, it's a stunning finding to have a Senate race in a Trump plus 18 state within the margin for error. At the time of his death, Graham had been gearing up for the fight, having just defeated his primary challenger, Greenville businessman Mark Lynch. I guess there's a name to keep in mind. Republicans will now need to replace Graham's name on the November ballot by holding a special primary election in mid-August. And they write, according to Politico, a special candidate filing period will open up on July 21st for Republicans interested in running for Graham's seat and will remain open for a week, according to state law and the state Republican Party. A primary would be held on August 11th, with a runoff if no candidate reaches 50% of the vote on August 25th. The winner of that contest will face Annie Andrews in November for a full 6-year term that would start in January of next year, according to the report. How about that? Lindsey Graham was no sure thing shortly before his passing. And Dr. Annie Andrews now has the benefit of having, she's been running for this race for quite a while, has the benefit of, has she secured 45% of the vote already without a candidate stepping forward? And who would step forward? I'm telling y'all, if I were a betting person, I would tell you that Nancy Mace, who, by the way, ran for governor in that state and, like Riley Gaines, finished 5th. Sorry. I would tell you, I would not at all be stunned if Nancy Mace said, maybe I should do that. Wouldn't stun me at all. I have not lived in South Carolina since 2018. I was very intrinsically dialed in to South Carolina political landscape back when I was there. But I can tell you, in the 11 years that I lived there, rarely was there ever a lot of attention paid on South Carolina politics by national Democratic movers and shakers. I think the lone exception being when Nikki Haley first ran for governor. And I think she won by like 5% of the vote, 3-5%. It was kind of close at the time. At the time, she ran against Vincent Shaheen, who was something of a moderate. This was back when gay marriage was still a very divisive topic. I sat down with Vincent Shaheen myself with my then, we weren't married. We obviously weren't married at the time, but we hoped to be. with my then boyfriend, and we had dinner with him. I remember it was at T-Bone's in Myrtle Beach, and I said to him, I said, "Sir, you're polling within the margin here where, like, if you came out for gay marriage, I doubt you'd lose a lot of support, but you could certainly gain support if 10% of the state's population might be LGBTQI+, and even 40% of them were registered voters. That's the vote you'd pick up, and you could win the race." And obviously he didn't. And that comes back to the conversation that I think we're having as a party about fighters versus folders. I heard that over the weekend, and I'll talk more about this tomorrow. Why Democratic Socialists are proving to be something of a jolt of support and enthusiasm within the Democratic Party. Because there are a lot of folks who are kind of tired of the status quo and want more fighters versus folders. Whatever you want to call them, Democratic Socialists or progressives or whatever you want to call them. The Democratic base wants fighters and not folders. And I can't help but wonder if in the aftermath of this Trump decade that we've all had to endure, and it'll be 12 years by the time we're done enduring it, I think that there's also that sense that Republicans have wanted that too, and that's why they went to MAGA, and they got fight, but they didn't get to stick to their principles. I think the exact opposite case with Democrats, in that Democrats have often shied away from standing stout and firm in their principles, and I think that also is why there is some enthusiasm for the progressive or the Democratic socialist candidate who is more in line with the party's principles and platform and willing to, actually fight for them. I got off on a little bit of a tangent there. Sorry. I know this is about South Carolina and what will happen in South Carolina. I will reach out to, I say we, it's me, it's a one-man show here. I will reach out to Dr. Annie Andrews and see about having her on in future days. I've sort of pondered doing that anyway. But this being a show based in Atlanta and a mostly Georgia-centric political conversation, I've just sort of not really. But again, the Senate's in play, and Democrats have become bullish on retaking the Senate. And if that were to happen, if South Carolina falls into the Democrats' hands, it might be along the lines of what happened with Senator Jones in Alabama. It may be a one-term only thing. It may be a blip on the radar. I don't know. I do know this. I think Dr. Annie Andrews is a fantastic candidate, and she's one that is running in a blue state, but she's not running as a tiptoeing, tightrope walking centrist Democrat who, bleats out some conservative, gobbledygook from time to time. No, she's just very much a liberal Democratic candidate who is, get this, speaking out on what she actually believes and standing firm on those values and those beliefs. And that is refreshing. I think there are voters drawn to that. My grandmother, I think of my grandmother all the time, on my mother's side, in 2016, when she, as that principled rock-ribbed Republican voter, hated Donald Trump, was disgusted by everything that came out of his pursed lips, that spray-tanned face. She found herself looking at what was happening in the Democratic primary and thinking, I like Bernie Sanders. I get goosebumps still just thinking about this. My Reagan Republican grandmother loved Bernie Sanders because he stood up for what he believed in, and he was very fervent about that. And she was drawn to that. I still happen to believe those kind of voters exist. Lindsey Graham gave us flashes of that in 2016 when he too was running for president against Donald Trump and in the aftermath of January 6th. But it was very short-lived. And that's why, for me, the legacy of Lindsey Graham will always be complicated. However you wish to pay your respects for him, that's how you do so. I chose just to have a conversation and remain, I believe, somewhat politically neutral. That'll do it for The Ron Show. Thank you for listening. Weekdays 8 a.m., 4 p.m. on Georgia Now, 11 p.m. Progressive Voice via TuneIn or via podcast. Show notes, as always, at RonShowATL.com. Take care.